What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. So one of the biggest things ever is a lot of players do like to wonder which game is going to be better. For example, we have Need for Speed here and also like the Crew franchise. And then on top of that, we have like Forza and stuff like that. But one of the biggest things I think about though, guys, is are we going to need all of these games to be, competitive? Now, we do know Need for Speed right now probably isn't the greatest place ever. For example, I actually haven't played Unbound in a pretty long time, but I was like, you know what? Let's jump back onto Unbound and really, try this game out again and maybe see how it is after all of this time of it being released. I do have to admit, this game is not going to be bad in any way, but there really is some things about it that you're most likely going to go, yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of this stuff. Like, you probably could have did this better, you probably could have did that better. Now, the one thing, though, is if we are talking about Need for Speed and comparing this to the Crew Motorfest, you can find issues with both. And you can most likely see how some games, might have issues or like, step up and do something better than the other one. And we are most likely going to see that pretty often. But one of my biggest things, though, is we are going to need both of these games to succeed in the future. That way we are going to have, competition in everything. I would say competition is going to be a good thing in basically anything. Because if one game is going to be better or step up and add like a different thing into that one, you are then most likely going to notice how it is going to impact the other one. A good way to look at this is probably like the Ford Bronco and the Jeep Wrangler. Both vehicles are going to have like their main following bases where a lot of people are going to be big fans of them. And you are probably going to notice that some might not like that truck or one might not like the other one. And you're going to be like, well, dang, maybe like if they update that, maybe Jeep, oh my goodness. One thing I have noticed, by the way, jumping back on this game, I legitimately cannot drive whatsoever. It is actually pretty bad, but anyway, though, guys, one thing I did notice about that, though, is yes, the Ford Bronco is going to be updated, meaning hopefully it's going to make them maybe update the Jeep in time. So if we have racing games that do have, like, different features in them, that a lot of people might end up liking them. They're going to be like, well, dang, what if another racing game had this? Or, like, what if this game ended up getting that updated or something like that? I do think it might end up helping it. I'm also going to do another race after this in a different car because this thing is honestly not good. I have the grip all the way up and my goodness, I cannot pretty much keep this thing in a straight line, but it is kind of weird jumping onto this game compared to Motorfest. You really can't see like the differences of like handling and stuff like that, but overall, guys, I would say having both games is going to be very important. Now, a few things I did want to touch on with Need for Speed, like, we do know this game does have police, which obviously the crew probably never will, and some of that might end up coming down to certain things like the actual, design of the game and the vehicles that are in it. For the record, though, I did want to jump into a different event driving the SVJ, which I really do hope this thing actually comes out in Motorfest. I love this car. But nonetheless, though, guys, as I was mentioning before, we do know a lot of the games do have different designs to them. Some of which some players are probably big fans of, and some are probably going to be like, well, yeah, they probably could have did this better, or like, most likely made that a little bit better. Now, one thing I would admit, though, is I would say Need for Speed and the Crew franchise is going to have good points on each side. For example, on this, though, we can see things like this in Need for Speed probably being like the kind of game to where it's going to be like an intense street racing style of a game, to where you're probably going to be like getting in police chases and driving like crazy cars or like, 1100 horsepower GTRs running from the police. And then you would look at the other side of like maybe the Crew being, a little more laid back, and you're probably going to race on like a nice tropical island, or something along the lines of having like crazy cars in that game to where you are racing a bit differently. The cars sound different. A lot of the vehicles are going to have like different handling models in them, which of course, playing both of these games back to back, it really is insane how different they actually are. Now, I would admit, though, even though both games do obviously have their flaws, I would admit we obviously need both of them. A few things I really like about Need for Speed is probably going to be, for one, the sense of speed in it. The feeling of running from the police doing 230 miles an hour is insane, and I really do like the way it's like a street style, like a racing, to where it's like, I guess, Fast and Furious, kind of, even though it isn't. I guess it's going to be slightly close to that, to where you can be like an intense street racer. And of course, throwing in police in there is going to make it even better. Now, a few of the negative points about that is, of course, having police in the game to where some of the manufacturers may never show up. We do know exactly which cars I'm talking about, like the Toyota Supra, and different vehicles that might not want to be in like a street racing game, I guess, even though you're technically street racing in Motorfest. Hopefully they don't find out about that. But if you are doing something like that in a game, then you're of course going to have to take a few hits in some areas to actually make that said game different. Now, we do know, though, having Need for Speed and the crew is probably going to be a important thing in the future. We do know, though, unfortunately, right now, I am going to make more videos about this, but we do know right now Criterion is apparently working on the next Battlefield game as well. So I would almost guess that the next Need for Speed game is most likely going to be slightly delayed. Now, I would say for some fans, it's probably not going to be a big deal because maybe they can make a better game over the time after, like, Battlefield is done. Apparently, it's also going to be a completely new Battlefield-like IP, so that is most likely going into, oh my goodness, I'm losing control of my SVJ. And this other dude's about to catch me because I keep crashing and messing up. But I would say, though, having, like, a new game, like a new Need for Speed game, guys, going against, Motorfest would probably be insane. As of right now, we are going to have Test Drive Unlimited coming in the future, which I am planning on making videos on that game as well, so do stay tuned for that. But my goodness, though, guys, having both of these games is going to be amazing. Even though this game does obviously have its problems, I still do love Need for Speed. I'm honestly a really big racing game enthusiast anyway, so jumping into basically any of these games really is a blast. I also have high hopes for the new Test Drive Unlimited. Even though we do not have a lot of information on that game right now, I do hope it is going to be good. And I really do hope in the future we are most likely going to see, an updated version of Need for Speed that's going to be what more players want. That's also going to be better. And then running from the police on a heat level 1 in a maxed out SVJ is probably not going to be very fair. And I just destroyed that cop. Wow. Instantly getting out of the circle though, but like doing things like this in this game, you cannot do this in Motorfest, so I do see differences in both game franchises that we do honestly need. And as I did mention earlier, having competition in basically everything is probably needed. One thing I do have to admit though, jumping back onto Motorfest compared to Unbound, it really is crazy how both of these games do feel. We all do know Unbound is obviously going to have a different feeling because I guess you could say like it's an arcade type of game, even though Motorfest probably is also going to be, an arcade type of game. But it is kind of insane though, guys. I know I'm not trying to sound kind of biased, but I do like the way Motorfest does feel over Unbound. And that's probably going to be the fact of like your car losing control for like no reason, or like, sometimes the handling in that game is a bit wonky. But even though it is going to be slightly odd in some areas, I really do love Need for Speed. And what's kind of funny about that though is one of my favorite Need for Speed games ever is not only going to be one of the most hated ones, I guess you could say it's probably going to be like one of the most mixed, I guess, opinion-based Need for Speed games, is going to be Most Wanted 2012. The reason for that though, I really did love the way the multiplayer on that game was, and I really did find it to be so dang fun to actually race in there. And who knows, maybe we might end up getting like a multiplayer focused game like that again. But we can all agree though, guys, I really do think having Need for Speed being like single player and multiplayer is different, or it's not going to be connected, or like, always online, is probably one of the best ways to make a racing game. I would also say making Motorfest or, different racing games having a single player to where multiplayer is going to be separate in some way probably is the best way to do it. I'm also going to be making more videos on that topic in the future. But I have to admit though, playing Motorfest and jumping back into Unbound really is going to be pretty insane how different they are. But I also at the same time really do respect both games and have a great time in both of them. I had a great time messing with the police in that game and like racing the SVJ. And the big thing for me though is probably going to come down to the way both games do feel different than the other one. And I would say that's probably going to be like the biggest factor of racing games now. A lot of players are most likely looking for something different and at least have like a different feeling to them. I'm also hoping in some way that Test Drive Unlimited might end up bringing this to us. But the reason I do say this though is every racing game, and even every game for that matter, is going to bring their own thing to the table, to where you're going to be like, well yeah, that's a dope feature, like why can't that be in the other game, or like, wow, they did that really well, I wish that was in that racing game. Or we also saw things like this happening in other racing games and also like other games in general. Like for example how Apex Legends had that one pinging system in there where Fortnite did not. We can all agree that was going to be an amazing thing to have in a Battle Royale game. And we do know, Fortnite developers were probably like, dang, we kind of missed that, or like, only if we would have added that a bit quicker. So we do know having different things in games can also influence the other ones, not only making the overall experience better, but increasing the competition. I really do find it kind of insane. Jumping on two different games really is going to have a pretty insane feeling, and you really can see where some games are shining and others are not. Now, we can all admit, though, guys, that I really do hope another Need for Speed game does come in the future. As I did mention earlier, I will be touching more on this in a future video. most likely multiple videos because I do love Need for Speed in the entire franchise, and I would love for that entire franchise to actually do great. And who knows, maybe Motorfest thriving a bit more in the future might end up driving them to make another game. I really do feel like something like that is most likely going to happen. I did end up making a video talking about how I do think Motorfest is going to improve, and of course get better as time does go on. We do know every game nowadays most likely releases with its own issues. For example, Unbound obviously is going to have problems to, well, after you actually beat the single player, what do you actually do? And then of course on the flip side of that, they did end up making multiplayer completely separate. That is probably going to spark a lot of frustration, things people did not want. And then on the other side of that, we also see something like this game obviously having its own issues. Hey look, a broken plane. I'm pretty sure I grabbed that before. But besides all that, guys, I would like to know what you think about all of this in the comments. I would almost guess that most players are going to want another Need for Speed game, and they are most likely going to want Motorfest to probably thrive. That way we can actually have both racing games and more that would most likely come out, that a lot of players can enjoy but also mix up like the overall gameplay. Because of course every game does have like its own like special setting to them, and also feeling at the exact same time. But once again though, let me know what you guys think about this in the comments below, and stay tuned for future videos going over different topics like this.